Welcome to Interviews of Grief, the show where we explore the depths of human emotion. I'm your host, Megan Pruitt. Grief is a universal experience that often hides in the shadows of our lives, rarely discussed openly. But it's through these heartfelt conversations that we find healing and hope. This is where we bring to light the story of those who have faced loss and the myriad of emotions that come with it. We're here to discuss the good, the bad, and the sometimes ugly aspects of grief as we seek to honor the memories of those we've lost and extend a helping hand to others navigating the same path. So join us as we embark on this profound journey, turning sorrow into strength, one conversation at a time. Welcome to Interviews of Grief. In this episode, my guest is Josh Bolen, the owner of Unrivaled Fitness, a community-centric gym that emphasizes both mental and physical well-being in Aiken, South Carolina. Josh shares his courageous journey that's marked by the profound loss of his father to suicide. His raw and honest narrative offers invaluable insight that resonates with many, serving as a wellspring of learning and hope for all who listen. Josh and I both share the belief that an open dialogue about grief is going to pave the way for healing. Throughout this discussion, we hope to shed light on the transformative power of sharing our stories and the immense strength it can bring. Before we dive into this conversation, it is crucial to mention that if you or someone you know who is struggling with thoughts of suicide, please seek help immediately. Your life matters, and there are people who care about you and your well-being. It's okay to share your feelings. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is available 24 hours a day. Thank you, Josh, for being so candid and sharing your story with others. I'd like to welcome Josh Bolen to Interviews of Grief. I've known Josh for a few years. He's the owner of a local gym, Unrivaled Fitness, where he's doing great things with personal training. He trains my daughter, Faye. She comes in with my husband. And we are here to talk about today the loss of his father and, more importantly, his emphasis and his life's mission now of mental and physical health. The purpose of this show, Interviews of Grief, is to really bring grief and the tough conversations that we have to have out of the shadows and to the forefront. It's been, when I lost my mom, just talking about it, hearing other stories. Grief is so universal, no matter how you lost that person. If you've had a significant, impact of grief, it's so important to talk about it. So welcome, Josh. If you would just tell me a little bit about your story, who you lost and when.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yes.
So a little bit about me. Like I said, I'm a health and fitness advocate, gym owner, personal trainer. I'm also a huge advocate of mental health as well. I lost my father in 2011, October 10th, 2011, to suicide. And that was a huge point in my life, obviously, because I've never dealt with anything even close to that. Never had to deal with grief, never had to deal with any kind of loss other than like grandparents or like distant relatives. I never really understood it. And then 2011 hit and it absolutely changed my entire life. And so that's kind of where I stand today as far as why I take such a huge role in trying to promote mental health, especially for men, but for anybody, really. I mean, it affects everybody. But for me specifically, to see how men are specifically affected by it and are so quiet about it. So I just try to give those people a voice whenever they're not ready to have a voice themselves. And then, and that's what I found with my father was I never knew he was struggling the way he was. And if he would have just said, I'm struggling, I need help, something along those lines, the story, the narrative may be different today. So that's why I take such a huge role in trying to be a voice for those people, even if they don't know they need it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just hearing it. Give me a little context of 2011. Were you married, kids? Where were you in your life stage?
2011, I was in college. It was my senior year at University of South Carolina. I was engaged to be married the next year, and was getting ready for graduation, living pretty much my best life, as a lot of kids say, I guess.
Yeah.
I love college, and I was very much the life of the party everywhere I went. Had zero cares in the world.
Yeah.
Was not ready at all to become an adult. I was 24. I think, yeah, I was 24, and it just it hit me. My mom gave me a call, and I was in the middle of a biology lab. I remember that specifically. Didn't have
Yeah.
my phone with me, and then I got back, and she hardly ever called me. Like if she called me, it was typically like I knew something was probably not right.
Right.
And so I take the call, or when I get back to my desk, I see I had a missed call and a voicemail. So I go out to the office or to the hallway. I call her back, and obviously she wasn't sure how to relay the message to me over the phone. And
Yeah.
so I answer the phone, and she's distraught. And they were divorced; they weren't together.
Mhm.
But she tells me all she said was, "Josh, your father's passed away." And I hung up the phone, wasn't able to say anything, and I walk into my class, just grab my stuff and leave. But she had called my fiance, then wife now.
Yeah.
My mom had called her when she couldn't get in touch with me. So she was already on the way to my office, to my class to come get me.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just, and at that point, I didn't know what happened. I just knew he died. I didn't know if it was a car accident, how it was. And so obviously I had no clue what was going on. Everything seemed like it was moving 1,000 miles an hour, but also seemed like it wasn't moving at all.
Yeah.
So it was just surreal in that moments leading up to me actually getting home. So I had to travel another hour and a half to get home. And so it wasn't until my wife came and picked me up, and I spent a little bit of time with her and a couple of my friends that rode with her. And I get to my mother's house, and my brother's there, and a lot of my friends are there. People had already known. And
Yeah.
when I get there, then my mom comes and grabs me, and she's like, "Josh, he did it to himself." And I'm still not even having a clue what
Yeah.
happened, because my father had alcohol issues and
Yeah.
substance use issues. And so I was like, "Yeah, I understand, Mom. I figured he had overdosed or got
Yeah.
like."
Drank too much. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, and then it hit me, and I was like, "Wait, what did you say?" And at that point, that's when I really comprehended what was going on.
Yeah.
And I was just absolutely devastated. And it, like I said, I grew up like in the blink of an eye, because I was 24 years old in college, and so, like I said, just an extremely give a shit less about anything type of person.
Yeah.
And in that instance, it aged me to a point to where, like, I immediately found out what anxiety was like and stress, and figured out, okay, that I lost a lot of, and not even like an innocence, but I lost a lot of my young adulthood just because I was forced to grow up.
For sure.
And to me, that was, just a huge, huge, obviously turning point in my life. But nothing's been the same since.
Yeah. I always say to people, I didn't lose my mom till I was 36, so I got to have those college years. But I feel like there's a person who you are before you have kids and after, and then there's a person who I am now before the loss of my mom and after. And it's like you want your old self back, but this is the new normal. This is the new me. It's wiser, more purposeful with my time with my kids, which I want to talk to you about, of how it's made you a father. But it will change you, and there's no way around that. And then you have to come to terms with that's okay. And this is the path that was like presented for you. But I connect with so much of what you're saying, like that surreal, it being like so fast, but then like you can replay it like a movie, you
Yep.
know? I remember going up to Chicago to see my mom in the ICU. They like let us have time with her when it got like really bad. And I can literally, I was walking into the hospital where I was born. She was going to die. I can tell you the route, the woman at the front desk. I can feel the elevator like going up, and then time just like slows. And it felt like something out of a movie almost, you know? And you can just replay the weirdest details in your mind, and it's just such a poignant time. And then I found out, I watched my mom die on FaceTime, and it was like that phone obviously delivered the worst message that you couldn't even fathom was coming. Same with me. And then just feeling like so blindsided, like, how did we even get here,
Right.
so okay, so you're 24, and it changes, like, life becomes like real. And you talked a little bit about how you for the first time kind of knew what anxiety and everything was. Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. So um, it, it changed me in so many ways, but one of the biggest ways, and it still affects me today. Um, I just I became a more hardened person,
Yeah.
uh, whereas I used to never have any kind of issues as far as like caring about stuff or whatever. But now, even today, like it just I don't. My wife would say I'm not empathetic. Like I have zero empathy.
Yeah.
Uh, but and that's probably true for the most part because when I'm in college, I'm still hanging out with guys who are between 20 and 26 years old.
Yeah.
They're dealing with issues of like, oh my God, what, like my girlfriend broke up with me, or um, having issues of just not being happy with grades and not being happy with whatever. And I'm
Yeah.
like, man, like that shit does not matter.
What you would do to worry about that shit, right? Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And so it's like, if somebody came to me with an issue, like if somebody came to me with a legitimate issue, I will always hear them out. But like if somebody came to me with like their dog died or some bullshit, like
Yeah.
it just it doesn't sit well with me as far as, and not saying that that's not a traumatic event for them.
Right.
I couldn't even comprehend what that little bit of grief was like compared to what I was going through. And that was selfish of me. But that's just how I was. And it's in today still, I have very little tolerance for small problems.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, I was 24 and I was forced to grow up really, really quickly. When I wasn't ready, I was not ready to grow up. So then me and my wife would get married in um, 2012, the next summer. So it was like 9 months after he passed away, and still really, really raw. And I stayed that way for a long time.
Yeah.
Um, and the hardest part for me was, and still to this day, like I don't remember a lot of the grief process because it seems like my mind shut it out because it was so
Yeah.
traumatizing to me that it's like there are month-long periods where I could not tell you one event or conversation or
Yeah.
and even leading up to, because I got married in 2012. We had our first kid in 2013. And a lot of those events just still were like so difficult for me to kind of process, like through like, all right, now I'm married and now I'm a husband, now I'm a father. Um, but now I'm doing this all without my father. And so
Yeah.
I was just bitter, like so angry, so mad. Um, really, really felt what anxiety was like after having a child. Not so much as far as like
Yeah.
married. 'Cause me and my wife, we've been together since high school.
Yeah.
But like once she got pregnant, and then it really hit me. Like if I didn't hear from her, if she was going to work and she didn't text me that morning,
Yep.
anytime I get a phone call, still to this day,
I know.
and I see that my mother is the one calling me, it it reopens. And it's silly stuff. She made me call into like but I almost hesitate to answer the phone just because of that one memory of seeing mom calling on the phone.
Yeah.
Um, but it got to the point to where anytime my wife, because at one point early in our marriage and early in um, us being parents. She was traveling an hour, hour and a half to work every morning. And so like I would, if I didn't have my phone with me, I'd text her off a friend of mine's phone. Like if I was working out at the site, and I'd say, hey, just text whoever I'm with, text them when you get to work, just so I know you're there. And if I didn't hear from her, it was just
Panic.
constant panic. Yeah. I guess that's just the initial portions of it. It took me years to get over that, and medication. I finally ended up getting on anxiety medication, and that calmed it down quite a bit. But I think more so the realization of dealing with what I was dealing with and figuring out how to deal with it. That's what helped me grow out of it a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like that was one of the things on the other side of this. Like I had a lot of medical trauma from all of this, like just the state that I had to see my mom in with, like she was prone, had a tube sticking out of her mouth, like fully sedated, and had a pool of like her own vial that was collecting around her eye. I'll never forget it. And then when we pulled her off the ventilator, they stopped all the sedative drugs, and she'd been asleep for a month. And we get her on FaceTime and her eyes are like wide open. And I told Brian like 2 or 3 times, I just had this like dream where I'm like jolted out of bed and my mom's there with her eyes wide open, like, what the hell's happening to me? And it's like the phone, the phone, exactly like you're saying. I mean, it's unreal. And there's like PTSD components to it for sure in grief that I don't think people talk about enough. And, I've joined this grief group at Millbrook. And so it's like people will tell their stories. And the resounding message should be like, you're not alone. Like if you're struggling long term from this, you're not alone. It's a regular part of like your body and mind's response, but it's what we do with it on the other side,
Right.
And I resonate too with your wife. It sounds like she probably has been patient with you and a good source of support. I know I couldn't have done it without Brian.
Yeah, Brittany's been, I mean, she was there, like I said, come pick me up from school. When it happened, and was by my side through the entire process of, and like I said, you really, even knowing, we've been through similar instances, but people who listen to this that have not been through it.
Yeah.
And you've got to pick out a casket, and you've got to pick out a headstone, and you've got to write an obituary. Things like that are just so difficult, and you're supposed to do it for your parents at some point in your life.
Yes.
Hopefully, it's when you're in your 70s and they're in their 90s. But mine was in my 20s, yours was in your 30s, and it's just you're not ready for it, and everything just is so raw, so early, and like Brittany was super patient with me because she was hurting too. I mean, we had been together for at that point 8-9 years.
Yeah.
So her family's my family, my family's already her family, and
yes.
So I mean, she lost somebody too, and it was obviously it was a lot more traumatizing for me, but for her to see me in that state, I think was traumatizing for her.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because I've always been, I've dealt with a lot of things in my life, and I've always been a fairly strong individual as far as persevering through tough situations. But this was just one of those things I could not, there's no way I could have gotten through it without her, without friends. And I mean, primarily it was her. I mean, I had friends reach out to me, but they don't know what to say. Like,
no.
And it gets to a point early on, especially, it got to a point where like everybody expected me to be me, how I was in September of 2011 instead of October of 2011.
Yep.
And everybody's like, all right, Josh is going to snap out of it soon. It's been 13, 12 years now, and I'm still a completely changed individual from who I was. And that's just, like you said, it's the new normal now. And I'm okay with it. I'm a lot more mature than I ever thought I would be.
Yeah.
And I mean, I still have spurts of immaturity, but it's still like there is people were like, okay, it's been 3 months. Surely he's fine now. Like it,
I know.
but it's, 12 years later and there's still certain things I cannot do. Like, um, holidays are so hard.
Yeah.
The anniversary of his death was October 10th. And so that was 20 days ago or so.
Yeah. His birthday.
Yeah, his birthday comes up.
Father's Day. That's a fun one. I always struggle with how in the heck am I supposed to navigate Mother's Day and celebrate myself as a mother when I don't have a mom anymore? And then everyone, I mean, nobody knows, and I get it. Everyone posts pictures on Facebook, and I'm like, that one cut me. The first Mother's Day was so tough.
Yeah, mine was, being October, it was right before Thanksgiving and right before Christmas, which was my father's two favorite holidays, because he loved a family get together and he loved to socialize with people. I mean, I still went to those events, like Father's Day with my grandfather on my dad's side, Thanksgiving, and to see how broken up my grandfather has been.
Yeah.
And I tell my wife all the time, like, I love spending time with my grandfather, but to me, my grandfather just looks like an older version of what my dad is supposed to look like. And so having a conversation with my grandfather is like, it's hard to do because it's like my dad's across the table.
Yes. And for me, we'll never know what our parents would have looked like being older. I think about that all the time. Like, my mom was only 63. I'm like, what would she have looked like? Would she have short hair? Would she have let it all go gray? And I think about that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so tough. Like for me, you have to take this at some point. And, it was a sermon at church. Your breaking point can be your breakthrough. And so I started thinking about that, and I was like, how is some good going to come out of this? Like, this can't all have been for nothing in a way. That sounds weird to say, but I think that losing her makes me a better mom, a more purposeful mom. There's some things that I want to take and do differently. There's some things that I wish I was more like her. How has it shaped you as a dad?
I mean, for me, it's a little bit different. Because obviously, I mean, my oldest son is named after my father, so there's a huge influence there. And it's almost made me harder on myself as a father.
Yeah.
And I pay more attention to the mental health of my children. Like my oldest son, like me and my wife have already got him in therapy talking about how to discuss his feelings and how to properly respond to different situations, just because most people don't know how to do that, like anybody.
Yes, that's great.
And so with him, and I've always heard that mental health was a genetic disorder, disease, whatever. And I think it's more so from not necessarily you're more prone to it because it's in your genetics, also the environment you grow up in. And you're shaped by your environment, right? So
absolutely.
Me, obviously, dealing with it firsthand from my father, I'm like, okay, I don't want my son to have to deal with that kind of stuff. And I'm not a risk in my own eyes as far as falling victim to the same thing my father did. But I mean, there's always that chance. And then to me, I'm harder on myself when I see my son struggling with anything. And especially mental health wise. And so I take that on myself, and I take it harder on myself. And I've just got to take a step back and remind myself, like, okay, right now he's 10 years old. And he is way further along than most 10-year-olds should be. And I think most kids are nowadays with COVID anyways.
Yes. Yeah.
Kids are exposed to extreme illness, and they're exposed to a pandemic, and they're exposed to quarantine. They're exposed to death and stuff. And when I was 10, I never had to deal with that. I was playing sports outside and jumping.
Yes, I know. It's so true.
So it's like I think all kids need to have some sort of counseling, even if it's just from their parents. Like, okay, look, this is kind of what you're dealing with. This is kind of how you should maybe deal with these situations. And if you can't tell them yourself, um, that's why we sought help as far as getting a pediatric therapist for our child,
Yeah,
uh, just so he knows like it's okay to feel certain ways.
absolutely.
Because I still don't process things properly, and I'm just after years and years of abuse and trauma on myself as far as dealing with situations.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not the person to try to say that therapy helped me. Like I've never been to therapy as far as grief counseling goes a day in my life, and I should
Yeah.
have. I should have been in there early, and I wanted to. Um, but as far as my situation and me being a father, it's ramped up my anxiety like no other. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm a lot harder on myself just because I don't want him to fall victim to the same things that I fell victim to. And I don't want him to fall victim to the same things that my father fell victim to.
Yeah.
And that goes with both my children. My youngest one is still a lot younger. I mean, he's only 6 right now. So he doesn't show those signs yet. But my
Yeah.
oldest one, he's definitely, and I think it's because he was born into it. He was born into an extremely stressed version of me.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that being that I was in such a bad place when he was born has really started to manifest anxiety in him.
Mm. It's so tough. It's like you might not be sure of the tools, how to give them the tools, but the fact that you have taken the steps to get them help will be such value for the rest of their life.
Right.
I can remember one time, my mom actually encouraged me just from some childhood stuff to go and talk to somebody. And there was an exercise I think that stuck with me for the rest of my life. um, the therapist said, I want you to write in your non-dominant hand with like a crayon or a marker, so left hand, a letter to yourself as a child, when you were a child, to yourself now. And I was like, this is stupid. Like, I don't want to do this, but it forces you to like sit there and slow down and think about what you would say. So we go that week, and it was a good exercise. I'll give her that. And then the next assignment was, okay, now you're going to go home and you're going to write to yourself now as an adult to a child. And like, what would you tell yourself? And I think about that too, like what I would have told myself early on in the grief. And like you were saying, you should have gone and gotten help from the beginning. Like, what would you tell yourself or tell somebody that's like fresh into it, that's had something horrible, traumatic, they're part of a club, that you and I are in that we never wanted to be in? What would you kind of say?
Um, it's really everybody deals with it differently.
Yeah.
And if there's an opportunity, and if you've got somebody close to you, just stick with them. Use them like a coat. Let them wrap themselves around you. And luckily, I had that. But if you don't have that, you've got to find some way to get it out. And that this grief counseling is probably the best way. And I saw grief counseling classes and seminars at Cedar Creek Church. Um, I was so close to signing up, but I've never been one to talk about feelings, and I will now more than I ever have.
Yeah.
Um, but at that point in my life, I was just an extremely closed off, and
You weren't ready. Yeah.
but I've always been like a hardened person.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so sensitivity to me was just not my thing. And
Don't I know it?
it should, I was afraid of being sensitive, and I was afraid of being vulnerable. And I think more so just for judgment reasons. I hate being judged, and I hate being, now I don't give a shit. But the, when I was in my early 20s, I mean, I was searching for an identity as a person before all this stuff happened. And then now I've been given an identity, and it's the identity of somebody whose father committed suicide.
Yeah.
And there was just, like I said, I remember being at his visitation, and people would just say the dumbest
Oh
shit.
my God, I know. I
And
know.
I would just sit there and like, I look back at it now and I'm like, people really say that thinking
I
it
know.
was going to help me. So like one of the biggest things is don't listen to what other people say, regardless of how your parents pass away, regardless of what grief you're going through or whatever. Nobody knows what to say, and nothing anybody says is going to make you feel better.
Yep.
'Cause, I mean, the 1,000 people that showed up to the visitation, you know, 95% of them probably said, we're thinking about you, we're praying for you, you know, everything's going to be fine in time, and blah blah blah. And then, the ones that stuck with me the most, and I remember vividly, I had multiple people come up to me and say, I can't believe how selfish she was. I can't
Oh,
believe how selfish she was. And I'm like 3 days into this.
yeah, no.
And yeah, it was, man, that pissed me off so bad. And it still does. And it's still a common response from people who hear about people taking their own lives.
Yeah.
It's selfish. Um, I've had people tell me that, regardless of whether he was saved or not, he's in hell and all these like just
Mm.
things to try to even process.
Yeah.
And so if you're going through any kind of grief, just try not to listen to other people unless they've actually been through it.
Yeah.
And find a group of people or find somebody that you can have that comforting. Like I said, they wrap you up like a blanket, man. They feel good.
Yeah.
And you'll know who they are.
Yeah.
Stick with them. That's the biggest thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me too, I would have told myself just like be patient. Be patient with yourself. Like there'll be days where I'm like fine and then something weird, like just be patient and like give yourself grace because there's no time limit to this. There's no roadmap. And it's just like I felt like when she was sick, I said, like, I feel like I'm on a roller coaster with like an iron seatbelt that's been welded and I don't have the choice to get off. And it still feels like that a little bit. Maybe the roller coaster's not as like going upside down and all around, but I'm still on a ride where I don't have control and I just got to go for it. You have to go through the motions
Right.
that are constantly changing.
Yeah. One of the things I wish I had some insight about. I've always had vivid dreams,
Mm,
but the dreams you have after are just so bizarre.
yeah.
And I saw where my father took his own life. He shot himself in the head, and
Mm,
so I saw where he was sitting. I saw the blood. I saw every aspect of it except for him being there.
yeah. Wow.
And so I had the worst reoccurring dream over and over and over for
Hmm.
years. And it
Yeah.
was almost like every night I would see him sitting in the chair and I'd see the gun go to his head. And I'm like just out of reach
Yes.
every time. And it seems like I could get close, but I could never get there before the gun went off. But then you have these almost like these affirmations. I remember having a dream that I was in church and he walked in and it was him probably about the age of 40 whenever he was his healthiest and his strongest.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember seeing him walk in and I'm sitting there in the church pew just looking forward and he sits next to me and he says, everything's fine.
Oh,
That,
wow.
that was the dream.
That's incredible.
And so you have like really, really profound moments of clarity and peace surrounded by all of the chaos and all of the struggle and all of the pain. Um,
Yes.
to me, and I don't have the dreams as often,
Yeah.
but they're still very, very clear when I have dreams about them. And very few of them are of pain and struggle anymore. Most of them are some sort of affirmation.
Yeah.
They just seem so clear and so real.
That's so powerful. And it's like, I don't know if you feel the same way, but watching my mom suffer, or, obviously your dad was suffering in silence, not telling anyone. It was harder for me to watch her suffer than to lose her. And I have really tried to make a conscious effort to change my mentality, like, especially in these last few days. Like, I would have just been coming home 2 years ago from Chicago at this time. And then she would have been on the ventilator. She would have died on the 12th of next month. And like these days are so notable. And I try to look at it like, not these were such hard times of suffering, but this was the last time she had to suffer. And then like reconciling in your brain that like you're not wishing death, but like at least now maybe there's peace on the other side of all of this, you know? Like my mom, all the physicians basically told us like if she were to survive and we could have gotten her off of the ventilator and onto a tracheotomy, like she would have had no quality of life. Like a nursing home wouldn't have accepted her. A long-term care facility wouldn't have accepted her. She would have been in this no man's land with like feeding tubes. She wouldn't have been able to speak if she couldn't take it out. Like it would have just been like a living version of hell. And so I just tried to tell myself like where she is now is better than where she would have been. Thing to come to terms with at all. Right. It's just, yeah. The suffering, do you think, has it manifested more in you that you didn't know? Do you feel like you should have noticed, or do you feel like truly he was maybe trying to protect you? How?
Um, knowing knowing what I know now, early on, I was really, really hard on myself.
Yeah.
Why wasn't I a better son? Was it my fault? Because my dad didn't do it the way that most people who commit suicide do. There was no letter, there was no phone call, and one of the hardest things for me was he called me earlier that week, and I wasn't able to answer the phone,
Mm.
but he left me a voicemail, and he always called me Coot. That was my nickname from him, and
Mhm.
um, he was like, "Hey, Coot, just give me a call whenever you get this. Um, 'Cause I love you, Dad," and that's all the
Mhm.
voice said. And so I constantly went through and just overanalyzed every aspect of our last conversation, of that missed phone call. Was he calling to tell me something? Was he calling to ask me something? Um, and it took me a long time to realize, like, most people, whenever they're convinced and actually go through with suicide, there's very little that somebody can actually say to change their mind
Yeah.
once they've committed, because all options have been weighed at that point for that
Yes.
individual. Um, and so I struggled for a long, long time and blamed myself for a lot. Um, and then finally, I just kind of, it's almost like stages of grief. Like I said,
Oh, for sure.
I was so angry. I was mad at everybody. I was mad at myself. I was mad at him. I was mad at God. I was mad. I was just mad. I was an angry
Yeah.
person. Um, and then you finally come to terms with that situation and that scenario. You- I don't know that I could have changed anything, and
Yeah.
it took me a long time to realize that, and it took me a longer time to realize and actually believe that it is not my fault. Like that, because it was. I mean, that was the hardest part for me. It was just constantly blaming myself.
Yeah.
Um, and now I don't. I realize that he was struggling and he was sick.
Yes.
He felt like he had no other options.
Yeah.
The not having a suicide letter or note or message or anything just left so much doubt in everybody.
Yeah.
Uh, then you have no clue why.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I know when my mom was in the hospital, like I only had one last phone call with her. And a lot of other COVID people will talk about how like their loved one was calling them regularly. And I only got one phone call, which I'm so beyond thankful for. But I always wonder like, was it just too hard for her? Would it have been the realization? Because I think she knew she wasn't going to make it. She had verbalized that to the nurse, like, and then I'm like, what? I don't know if I would have had the strength for that like last big phone call myself. And I just kind of try and reconcile in my mind, like she gave what she could, and we were lucky to have gotten anything, really.
Yeah.
It's tough. Um, can you talk to me real quick about how your journey to now fitness and placing the correlation between fitness and mental health has helped you out?
Yeah. So I've always been into working out. And it's just kind of where I've always known who I was.
Yeah.
In a gym, in a weight room, run like exercising. And
Yeah.
that's one thing that my father instilled in me at a young age. Because he was always in the gym working out, and I always wanted to be in there next to him. Um, and I see that now with my children too, and I'm extremely thankful for that. But whenever my father first passed away, that was the only place where I could go and like just get away. Like I couldn't go to class because class reminded me of how it happened, like how I found out. And then um, I didn't like doing the same things I used to enjoy doing, like hanging out with friends, having poker night, going to the bars, whatever.
Yeah.
Um, and so I spent every night at the local Planet Fitness in Columbia for hours, like 2 hours a night. And I just go in there and work out. And for those 2 hours, I was, obviously getting my workout in, but I was able to listen to music that meant something to me.
Yeah.
And to me, I think there's something so healing about music um, that I was able to just listen to a playlist and get in there and get out of my head and start exercising. And exercise, like I said, it's always been a huge part of my life. And so my last year in college, I was able to take on an internship as a personal trainer and start working with athletes.
Mhm.
And everything's still so new as far as having just lost my father, but working with people and helping them get stronger and helping them get
Yeah.
better. And what I never knew as a personal trainer until I got out of the athletic training world and into working with general population is how much your personal trainer becomes almost like a therapist.
For sure.
And not just physically, but like people mentally or they vocalize with their therapist, almost are their trainer, almost like they would a therapist or a hairdresser. They just
Yes.
you're just sitting there, you're having a conversation, and
Totally.
and I would naturally bring up my situations. Like if I knew somebody was struggling with something, um, I talk about my history with um, seeing substance abuse as a child, or seeing
Mhm.
physical abuse as a child, or everything that I had been through, um, and people saw how strong I was mentally, and it would almost like give them like, damn, I had no clue that you had been through anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I started seeing that as almost like empowering to be able to bring light to people who were struggling.
Yeah.
Uh, so obviously being a personal trainer has been good for people's physical health. But I'll be the first to tell any of my members, my clients, my friends, other trainers, whatever, if you're not mentally strong, being physically strong doesn't do shit for you. Like
Yeah.
you
So
gotta you gotta be strong through the mental aspects of life, because that's all physical training is for, is to make your life easier or better in some form or fashion.
yeah.
Um, but if you're not strong enough mentally, or if you're not dealing with things properly, it doesn't matter how healthy you are, because ultimately your brain, that organ up there, if it lets go on you and it starts to turn you into a downward spiral,
Yep.
then you're going to get sick. You're going to physically feel bad.
Yep.
You got to start with the mind.
Yeah.
Um, and especially here recently, I started probably 5 years ago, well, probably longer than that now. I guess probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I started posting stuff and on Facebook. Um, and I remember the first time I did it, like, and I don't even know why I did it. Like, I felt like people would give a shit less about my story, but they
Yeah.
won't, like, somebody out there was probably needed to hear a story, not necessarily my story, but needed to hear a story.
Yes.
And so I don't post stuff to get likes or to get
No.
comments or get whatever out of it. I post stuff just so people can realize, like, okay, Josh seems like he's a pretty strong individual. Josh seems like he's got his head on right most of the time. Um, but I had no clue he went through something so traumatic and can live such a air quotes normal life.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'll post my story out there. I'll post it out there on Father's Day, and I'll post it out there on um, the date that he passed away, and those different things. And it's not for people to realize my story, but it's for people to kind of look at and say, okay, somebody else has gone through this, or God forbid, one of my friends is actually so depressed that they're thinking about committing suicide.
Yes.
Because it is so common, and nobody talks about it, and that's what pisses me off so much is
I know.
all the statistics around it. And I know personally that men don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it because you're almost ashamed that you feel the way you feel, and you're not supposed to. The
Right.
world shouldn't make you feel that way.
No.
And so if I can put my side of the story out there, hopefully somebody else can reach out to somebody.
Yes.
If
Yeah. And I think it's so important too that you're a man talking about it, right? Because in society and in grief, in anything, you're supposed to be like the pillar of strength, not talk about these kind of things. And I do believe that's why male suicide rates are higher than female. You're not given the tools maybe to talk about your emotions. And I just think it's so important that we have open and honest conversations. And I'm glad that I feel like it's becoming less taboo maybe than our parents' generation, right? Where like uh if you were an alcoholic, maybe it was known in the town, but nobody talked about it. Or, if you struggled with mental illness, there wasn't commercials on the TV for how you could go and get help. I think we're moving in the right direction, but I also still feel like the system is kind of broken and you have to have more people talking about it.
Yeah, and that was the hardest part for me, was being vulnerable, because you feel like you're going to be judged, and like you said, men are supposed to be the pillar of strength in their families and communities and whatever. And I would consider myself uh, a toxically masculine man. That's just who I am. Um, but I'm not afraid to say that I've been hurting, or
Right.
I needed somebody to help me. But it took me a long time to get there, because
Yeah.
I remember being in the beginning stages of this, and I was like, oh my God, people like, what are people going to think of me? Now my last name's been tarnished just because of what my father did. Um, like, what are people going to think of him? And anytime, I mean, it took me a long time to start to begin the discussion.
Yeah.
But now that I look back on it, just because a man talks about it doesn't mean he's weak.
No.
To me, it's the exact opposite.
Absolutely.
Because you're putting your own self pride to the side, and you're trying to empower somebody else. You're trying to enrich somebody else's life, which is part of being a man, in my opinion, is
Absolutely.
to lift up the people around you.
Yeah.
And for me, the people that I try to lift up the most right now at this moment are people who are hurting and in dark places and need to be loved. And it's just, like I said, today's society is a lot easier than it was for my father's society.
Yeah.
Just because it is more openly talked about. It's still not talked about nearly enough.
I agree.
And I see it early on too. Like, kids they take that masculinity, that masculine trait, and they hold on to thinking that men are supposed to act a certain way. And it's starting to kind of shift a little bit. And I do believe men are supposed to do certain things.
Yeah.
But that's one thing I just wish that everybody would kind of realize and say, like, suicide is not rare at all. Suicide and mental illness are probably one of the most, mental illness is probably one of the most diagnosed illnesses in America as far as anxiety, depression, bipolar, uh, all of those different things. I know just off the top of my head, countless people who are on some sort of anxiety medication.
More that are on it than off.
Right.
You know, it's more the norm. Yeah.
And it's almost like that's the common thing right now is for everybody to be on anxiety medication. But we live a stressful life. Everybody in America lives a stressful life. Mine may be more stressful or less stressful than yours or somebody else's, but everybody stresses about something, especially in today's world where it seems like politics never end, or it seems like inflation's never going to end.
Yes.
Everybody's trying to figure out how
to survive
to pay for groceries or whatever, and COVID and just all these different things. So now we need it more than ever because there's so many stressors in people's lives, and if you don't know how to deal with them, it's just going to manifest in other avenues of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that we haven't touched on that I think if you're in the Aiken area, I think that what makes your gym so unique in your approach is the community aspect of it. There's a private Facebook page that Josh does once you join the gym where it's everything from like recipes, where you can get like protein drinks, but then way more importantly, it's a place where there's a community that supports each other when they are struggling. They go and post when they need prayers, when somebody's mom's not doing well. There's a resounding community that's supported then by the mental and by the physical aspect of everything that you're doing. And I just think it makes it so unique. I mean, I've met some of my really good friends from your gym, you know, and you were such a source of support, whether you know it or not. I just remember you like texting and always commenting on my Facebook post when my mom was sick. And it's just like, you're a solid guy. I think from the things that you've gone through have made you realize that you want to be kind of like that all encompassing, like you said, I think a blanket or like a, you know, and that's what you're doing and you should be really proud.
And when I opened the gym, that was my main goal, was the community. And I don't know if it was something that I was seeking for myself. And it probably was just looking back on it, I want to help as many people as I possibly can. And my main goal in life is to make a difference.
Yes.
And I think that should be everybody's goal, is to leave your mark. Like,
yes.
And so whether it's helping people lose weight or helping people get healthier, helping somebody through the hardest times of their life, whether it comes to losing a loved one or whatever. And so, that community aspect of our gym is probably the coolest, most important thing I've ever done in my life. And I've got people who reach out to me all the time, members, and I tell them to, like, I want them to reach out to me. And like you said, for people who don't have that blanket of love and support, I try to create that not only through me, but the members in the gym have taken on that entire persona of, like, if somebody's sick or their mom's in the hospital, like, they're getting gift baskets, they're getting phone calls, they're getting everything they need. We've got members themselves who are sick. We went through a span there. We've had a few of our ladies go through different types of cancers. We've had autoinflammatory diseases, autoimmune diseases that got really, really serious. But the community in the gym, we're family, and it gives people that extra support system. I just delivered. I had a member go out. She had a tumor removed from her abdomen 2 weeks ago. It was a non-cancerous tumor, but this girl has been through a lot, and the tumor was a large, large tumor. And so I reached out to her and I said, tell me what you need. Does not matter what it is.
Yeah.
And she wanted a case of water. That's all she wanted. I go get her a case of water. I deliver it to her. But while I'm there, I find out one of my trainers has already been there and delivered a fruit basket. So it's like, even though I wanted the community and, like I said, I wanted it for myself because I needed people in my life who were going to support me as much as I support other people, and they do.
I
Um,
know.
I mean, they show up for me, and they show up for me in droves whenever I need something, and I love it.
Yeah.
Uh, but we reciprocate that every single, whether it's supporting everybody's. I try to support as many people as I can through their children and
Yeah.
fundraisers and sponsorships, and they do the same for me. But it's that community aspect of it where somebody's not afraid to go on the Facebook page and say, if y'all don't mind, please pray for my mom. She's in the hospital. If you don't
Yeah.
mind, please pray for me. I'm going through some personal, whether it's divorce or sick children or whatever. If somebody needs prayer, they get it.
Yeah.
I'm not the most religious person on the planet, but I still will pray daily for my members.
Yeah.
And it's just, like I said, they're family to me. I pray for them just like I do for my wife and children and mom and brother. And when I see them struggling, I know that prayer does work in its own form and fashion.
Yes.
And whether it just be from the support that people feel from it or some other alternate being, whatever it's from, prayer works, in my opinion.
Yes. I agree. I agree for sure. Well, I think I want to end this. One thing I like to do, and I think it's important to note, I'm going to ask Josh to describe 3 words that would describe his current state of grief. But these are so interchanging. And the 3 words I would have given you at the beginning when everything was so raw, and maybe even like a week ago before we really started, like she wouldn't have entered the ICU yet, it's always changing. But if you could give 3 words that would kind of describe your current state of grief, where are you at? What would be those 3 words?
Acceptance for sure.
Yep.
That was, and it took me a long time to get there, but acceptance is where I'm at right now. Peace, because I can look back on where I was compared to where I am now and see that I went from being so angry and so hurt and so broken to a place to where I can kind of like look back and see, okay, I've changed again, and you're constantly evolving. You're never going to hit your final form.
Yeah.
But right now, I do find a state of peace with everything I've seen and been through. And I'm just grateful. Like it's my struggle, my life has not been the best by any means. It could always be worse.
Gosh, yeah.
I've got a house over my head. I've got a great business. I've got a great job outside of that. I've got a wife and kids and more friends right now through the gym than I ever thought possible.
Yeah.
And so I'm just so grateful for everybody who's been there through the beginning phases of it and dealt with me. And then the people I've got now and they understand. Everybody kind of knows my story now. And that's kind of the point. I want people to know my story. And so they'll reach out to me just like, hear me on a podcast, or they'll see my stuff on Facebook. And I'm just grateful that I've got a platform to where I can get my message out.
For sure.
And I want that platform to continue to grow, not necessarily for a business aspect of it, but I want the platform to grow to get the word out about the mental health side of things. And the more people that I know, I see, I talk to, that listen to this podcast, that add me on Facebook, they're going to get a heavy dose of some
Real life.
Yeah.
Life.
And that's one thing about me. Like, I'm just a very real person. Like, if I'm hurting, I don't mind telling people. If I'm on top of the world, I don't mind telling people. And me and my wife joked about it the other day. Like, and not even really joking. We talked about it the other day. Like, social media is just such a false sense of like happiness, and like everybody's got the perfect world.
Yeah.
And me and my wife, we were driving back from Pittsburgh, and she was looking at something and laughing. And I was like, "What are you looking at?" And she said, I'm just thinking about how unrealistic everything is on social media.
I know.
And to me, that's social media can add to the benefits of helping with mental illness.
Yeah.
To me, right now, whenever social media is at its all-time highest, and it's only going to get worse.
Yep.
To me, social media is far more detrimental for mental health than it is positive, because so many people see a lifestyle and they compare.
Yes. Facade.
Yeah, these people are so happy. Look at their family pictures. These people are, oh my gosh, they've got the perfect life. Why can't my life be as great as so and so's?
Yes.
And so I'll put my broken shit out there, like,
Yes.
and my life is good, but it has not always been. And I'm thankful and grateful for every scenario I've ever been put into in life.
Yes.
That makes me who I am. And if I had never been through my father's suicide, who's to say where I'd be right now as far as a business owner and a mental health advocate? Yeah, your life is shaped based off your experiences, and you're put in circumstances for a reason.
Absolutely.
And it, to me, and I was asked this on a job interview one time. What would you change about your life if you could change one thing about your life? What would it be? And I think if anybody asked me that question and knew my past, they would think, oh, losing my father in suicide or whatever.
Yeah.
But I can honestly say that I don't think I would change a thing.
I know.
Just because you don't, you know what you've got now.
Absolutely.
And the butterfly effect to me is just, if he was still alive and he was still struggling, what would my life be like seeing that?
I know.
And so, no, I'd say I'm grateful.
Yeah.
It was hard. But you know, there's all kinds of quotes and sayings out there that God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers.
Yeah.
And I've been through a rough road, and it took me a long time to realize that there is still beauty on the other side, and that's the point I'm at now. I mean,
Yeah.
every day is a blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. And to know you this is not just like talk. You practice these three words, the acceptance, peace, and being grateful. And it's so evident in your business. And like you're saying, your portrayal of social media, it's accurate, it's not like this poison of life is great, or this poison of, yeah, if I only posted the best things of my life, it would look pretty dang good, but it's not reality. It's not realistic. And I think that you are extremely brave. And I think your experiences have shaped you into this person. And I think your dad would be really proud, Josh. I really do.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'll have a link to Josh's business, Unrivaled Fitness, in the show notes. And thanks for taking the time to talk.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.